Welcome viewers! As I alluded to in my previous video essay, I am branching off into some Mass Effect story and lore content. This will include discussions of various foundational narratives of a Mass Effect universe with particular focus on the original trilogy. In this video, I wanted to cover some ground rules for what I'm discussing. The purpose of this is to define what I consider canon to the overall story. Some other videos have covered Mass Effect lore, and while most of the sources are obviously solid, there are some more questionable things that slip out there. As always, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Also feel free to like and subscribe if you don't. Some viewers may wonder why any interpretation would be necessary when we could just check Bioware's website or ask someone from the dev team. Since the beginning of the Mass Effect trilogy, the team at Bioware has undergone a certain amount of turnover. Even senior members of the team, such as former lead writer Drew Karpyshyn and former director Casey Hudson, have gone on to work on new projects. Additionally, members of the development team have commented on certain aspects of the story both in social media and traditional media. These comments come from a variety of perspectives and share different levels of personal knowledge about all the decisions involved. This raises the question on relying on the creators as the lore and canon of the Mass Effect universe. The question is, how do you interpret what is out there?
That's the neat thing. You don't.
Mass Effect should be considered its own universe, and certain parameters and rules exist, and analysis should stay within the four corners of the source material. With this in mind, the games, DLC, and in-game text such as the codex entries exist as the primary sources. This is what Bioware presents as the core Mass Effect experience. While it may sound obvious to say, cut content and hidden dialogue is not itself canon. It can align with certain canon narratives, but any discussion of it should note that it was not included in the final product. Now, throughout these games, certain scenarios and story aspects vary according to player choice. In the event of variable scenarios, a single canon is not declared, but the possibility of events must be considered. Additionally, decisions or outcomes can only be made canon by a canon source. Sequels such as Mass Effect Andromeda and the upcoming Mass Effect game obviously would fit that bill. Andromeda will receive just passing mention here, as Bioware largely sets the story apart from the original trilogy. Also, full disclosure, I haven't played it. The upcoming sequel, 4 or 5 depending on who's counting, will also canonize certain aspects, such as the Destroy ending, but not having been released yet, will not be discussed in this particular video. Additionally, there exists an expanded universe of novels, comics, films, blogs, and other releases that form secondary sources. In this analysis, material in secondary sources is not always necessarily canon. To use an analogy, DLC serves as opportunity for developers to experiment with gameplay elements, graphical features, etc., some of which may or may not be brought back in future installments. Secondary sources offer writers and artists opportunities to promote or play with story elements that also may or may not come back in the main series. So what makes one of these secondary works canon? Determining whether or not one of these side stories is canon is not always an exact science, but their status strengthens when they get referenced elsewhere. The more frequently and directly that other works reference a secondary work, the more reliable we can judge it to be. If a primary source, or one that we know is canon, directly confirms a side story, then we can judge the events as canon. Without listing off every single source, the following is a general overview of various sources as a demonstration. Keep in mind that this is not a statement of a source's quality as a work of art. That varies quite a bit between sources. Rather, this is simply assessing its status as a canon work within the Mass Effect universe. Highly confirmed secondary sources would be as follows. First, the trilogy of novels by Drew Karpyshyn, Revelation, Ascension, and Retribution, are definitely confirmed canon. Drew Karpyshyn was the lead writer for Mass Effect 1 and 2, but that is not the reason why. Rather, these novels are canon because the games confirm the events that take place in them. David Anderson discusses the events of Revelation in Mass Effect 1 and 2, with additional confirmation from Kaylee Sanders in Mass Effect 3. Tally discusses the finale of Ascension in Mass Effect 2, whereas Grissom Academy and the Ascension program merits mention in the Overlord DLC and an entire mission in Mass Effect 3. Additionally, the Elusive Man discusses the events of Retribution in Mass Effect 3 with his assistant Janna. Going back to Revelation, the human ambassador in the novel, Anita Goyle, even makes an appearance in an Andromeda video log. Side note, the Elusive Man makes his debut in Ascension, which actually inspired Bioware to make a greater role for him in Mass Effect 2. Among the comics, for example, Invasion is clearly canon. It serves as a prequel to the Omega DLC and Mass Effect 3, and Arya addresses the events in the base game of Mass Effect 3 as well. The characters, enemies, and artwork also reappear throughout the Omega DLC. Redemption is likewise a prequel comic to Mass Effect 2. Liara directly addresses these events on Ilium. Moreover, the events tie into the Lair of a Shadow Broker DLC. Inquisition depicts the promotion of Armando Bailey to the head of CSEC. Again, this is confirmed in Mass Effect 3 and has a direct line leading up to the Cerberus coup. Issues of Homeworlds and Foundations can largely be considered canon. Rex's issue, for example, appears heavily in line with the events of the Mass Effect series. Tally's issue does as well, and the end panel actually suggests Quarian's survival as canon in Mass Effect 3. The movie Paragon Lost also is canon, as James discusses it with Shepard in Mass Effect 3 during your conversation with him. Interestingly, the mobile games also appear loosely confirmed as canon. Mass Effect Galaxy, a mobile game that focused on Jacob Taylor, was released in 2009, and 2010's release of Mass Effect 2 mentions the events and characters directly. As dated as it is, being a mobile game released in 2009 with a bare-bones staff, it resembles a Newgrounds Flash game more than a big-budget Mass Effect game that we would be used to. It still has some significance. This is, of course, the first appearance of Jacob and Miranda, but it also previewed Mass Effect 2's depiction of Cerberus as operating in a morally gray area, as opposed to its more patently evil introduction in Mass Effect 1. Infiltrator, which features a rogue Cerberus agent who escapes an experimental laboratory, is also arguably confirmed as canon. The original release of Mass Effect 3 could interact with the player's Infiltrator save file if they completed the game on a linked account. This added a new war asset, which arguably alluded to the game's events. Side note, this war asset is no longer available because the mobile game is no longer supported. Unsurprisingly, the plot of this game isn't terribly groundbreaking, but it does align with a common narrative we see with Cerberus experimentation. On the furthest end of the spectrum, the novel Deception is explicitly confirmed as non-canon. Not because the writer was not otherwise involved in Mass Effect's creation, rather because it flatly contradicts various lore elements in the Mass Effect universe. The errors were actually enough to cause a backlash among fans who read it and prompted an apology and retraction from Bioware. As a side note, while I am using this as an example, I won't be discussing the author or criticizing them for one simple reason.
Guys, look at me. Look at me, okay? You looking at me? It doesn't matter. Don't get so worked up about something this meaningless, and don't harass people over petty drama from 10 years ago, okay?
Next, I'm going to go into unconfirmed, possible, and plausible secondary sources. These examples are things that could have happened in universe, but don't necessarily count for one reason or another. I'll start with certain issues of foundation. While some issues clearly depict canon events, some are less confirmed than others. Jacob and Miranda's issue, for example, is highly tangential to the overarching Mass Effect story, doesn't really get mentioned again, at least not in any detail, and may as well be considered a what-if scenario, whether intended as such or not. He Who Laughs Best, which features Joker, is also unconfirmed. It depicts Joker hijacking the Normandy and completing a dangerous demonstration, somehow inspiring a Turian officer to recommend him to pilot the Normandy. This is not something that comes up in the games, and frankly sounds unlikely. I also don't count blogs such as Cerberus Daily News to necessarily be canon unless their events get mentioned inside the games. The reason for this is simple, and that is because these are promotional materials. Promotional materials can be canon, but in my estimation require further confirmation. This may prompt some disagreement, but Evolution will be treated as very much unconfirmed. For those unaware, Evolution is a 4-part comic that depicts the origins of the Elusive Man. In this origin story, we watch Jack Harper, a mercenary aligned with the System Alliance, during the First Contact War. Harper is joined by 2 associates, Ben Hislop and Eva Kor. The trio go on a mission on Shanxi at the behest of General Williams, grandfather of Ashley Williams. Over the course of this mission, the group encounters General Decius Arterius along with his brother Saren, discover a mysterious artifact called a Arca Monolith, and find that there are forces at work in the galaxy that humanity can hardly fathom. The series ends with Jack Harper founding Cerberus and reading off the famed Cerberus Manifesto. At first glance, this is all highly significant. This is the origin story of the Elusive Man. This is the most extensive depiction of the First Contact War. According to the text, we see the first humans ever to land on the Turian world of Palaven. We see the earliest depiction of Saren Arterius, the death of his brother, and the possible nucleus for his radicalization. We see the first depiction of an apparent Reaper artifact. We find that the series' 2 primary antagonists, besides the Reapers, met face to face. This all seems very significant to the overall story. However, there is little in-universe evidence of these events, and we even have reason to doubt that this is genuine. So let's look at some supporting evidence first. First, there is some passing reference in future works. The last name of character Ben Hislop appears in Cerberus Front Company Cord Hislop Aerospace, which is mentioned in the novel Ascension. Eva Kor, an infiltration unit on Mars, is named after one of Jack Harper's associates. The last name of Cora Harper from Mass Effect Andromeda may have some reference to Jack Harper as well. Finally, the Cerberus Manifesto exists in this comic and is mentioned in future codex entries for Cerberus. Now let's look at some counter-evidence. First, Saren and the Elusive Man spend considerable time together in this comic. It appears like an important event as well as a monumental coincidence. However, this goes unmentioned at any point in the future. Not by Saren, not by the Elusive Man, not in any codex entries or Shadow Broker logs, anywhere. Next, the Elusive Man spends time around and receives glowing blue eyes from a Reaper artifact called the Arca Monolith in the comic, but this device goes unmentioned elsewhere. The eyes apparently contradict the more clear-cut implants the Elusive Man has by the time of Mass Effect 2. Codex entries for Cerberus mention the Elusive Man's manifesto, which warns of alien genocides against humanity. However, the manifesto does not directly say this. Finally, Evolution depicts Decius's death after the First Contact War, at Saren's hand, all to destroy a Reaper artifact. However, the novel Revelation, which we know to be canon, contradicts this. Anita Goyle actually says that Saren lost his brother during the First Contact War. To be clear, none of these items are insurmountable. They can be explained away by artistic license, minor retcons, or even simple errors. This also isn't trying to say that this is a bad story. Instead, Evolution is simply case in point that stories that take place outside the primary source material can often be taken with a grain of salt. With all that said, secondary sources are by no means absolutely essential to experiencing the world of Mass Effect, but they do have something to offer on their own and provide additional context. Hopefully this video gives you a sense of how I analyze Mass Effect's story. I realize this is all rather meta, but I do want to get some ground rules out of the way. Thanks for watching.